So at this time, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Roger Rosenquist, who will be your webinar moderator. Go ahead, Roger.
Thank you, Bob, and welcome everyone to today's msexchange.org webinar, part of the new webinar series of informational webinars from msexchange.org, a trusted resource for exchange administrators since 1996. msexchange.org publishes unique content created by many of the most respected exchange experts in the world, and is also home to the largest independent exchange server community with over 85,000 registered users active on its message boards. Today's webinar is sponsored by Kemp Technologies. Kemp Technologies is the #1 price performance load balancer and application delivery controller used by thousands of businesses who consider IT, e-commerce, web, and business applications as mission critical to their long-term success. Kemp helps companies rapidly grow their businesses by providing 24/7 infrastructure availability, better web performance, and secure operations, all while streamlining IT costs. Joining us later in today's webinar will be Jason Dover and David Sanchez, both senior sales engineers with Kemp, to answer any questions that you may have. My name is Roger Rosenquist, and I'll be the event moderator. I have a few quick housekeeping items that I'll cover, and then I'll turn it over to our presenter, J. Peter Bruzzese. Please note that we are recording today's event. So there are a few audience webinar controls I'd like to review before we get started. If you've joined the GoToWebinar session, but you're not currently seeing a control panel similar to this screenshot, look for a smaller panel with the white arrow surrounded in orange. Click on the arrow and the full control panel will appear. If you don't see the arrow, you may need to turn off your browser's pop-up blockers. Today's webinar has 2 audio options that are displayed when you click on the plus sign next to the audio tab. The mic and speakers option is the default setting. So if you've dialed into today's event using a telephone number, select telephone to avoid possible feedback or noise. If you're hearing the audio of me speaking through your computer speakers or your headset and the sound is good, you should just leave mic and speakers checked. If the audio quality is poor through this setting, you can select telephone and then dial the telephone number provided. If you do so, be sure to enter the access code and the PIN code that will be displayed when you select telephone. On the side of the control panel is a blue button with a small square. This will display your presentation in full screen mode, and then hit escape to return to normal display. All participant lines are muted for today's webinar, so if you have any problems or you need to communicate with me during the event, please use the questions feature at the bottom of the control panel to send a question to the organizer and panelists, and I'll try to give you assistance. We also highly encourage everyone to use the same questions panel to submit any questions or comments you have during today's presentation. We will be pausing about halfway through the presentation to take a few questions, and then again at the end of the presentation to take any remaining questions, and we'll take as many as we can. Our speaker for today is J. Peter Bruzzese. J. Peter is a Microsoft certified trainer who holds multiple MS certifications. He is also a Microsoft Exchange MVP, an internationally published technical author, and a well-known tech speaker and journalist. His work concentration has been and continues to be enterprise environments with a special focus on Active Directory, Exchange, SharePoint, and desktop operating systems. And now, J. Peter, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Roger. Yes, it's true. My name is J. Peter Bruzzese. I am an Exchange MVP. There are roughly 100 of us in the world and only 20 in the United States, so I'm privileged to be part of an elite group of persons who are known for contributing time and effort toward the Exchange community. As you can see here, I like taking certification exams. That's sort of a given there. I'm also the co-founder and CIO of Clip Training, which is a provider of Windows and Office end-user training through an online portal system we developed with a team from Disney. I'm also a technical author with a dozen books to my name that are sold internationally. I'm a speaker. My last speaking assignment was actually yesterday here in Orlando at the Microsoft Exchange Conference, MEC, where I spoke to folks about unified messaging as well as high availability with unified messaging. That was one of the subjects, and so that's one of the things we'll be talking about today. Now, for most people, a single bio slide would be enough, but I wanted you to see the full scope of the Exchange work that I do. I won't read all of this to you, but it's good for you to know that perhaps you actually know me from other things, my site exclusivelyexchange.com, or the reviews I've done for msexchange.org, or through the Exchange training videos I do for TrainSignal. I'm also the Enterprise Windows columnist for InfoWorld. So hopefully you're all thoroughly impressed with my background and have no doubts in your mind that the time spent with me today will be worthwhile. So let's jump right into the presentation agenda. So for starters, even though our main focus today is going to be the non-mailbox server roles, it seemed wrong to leave out the mailbox role, so we'll do a quick review of DAG and we'll segue into our main topic from there. So we're going to talk about the unified messaging server and high availability. Then we'll go into hub and edge transport servers and high availability, the client access server and high availability, and then we'll talk about at the end how Kemp can help provide a greater level of high availability and load balancing for your organization. So if you look at this, we're basically starting with the servers that are easier to make more highly available and to load balance, and then we'll move into the more difficult one, which is client access server. And really with UM, one of the reasons why that's right up at the top is because that's a server that a lot of folks have not even begun implementing. It's a server role that's just not really utilized as often as some of the others. So we'll talk about that as well. So let's get started and talk about database availability groups. So when we talk about high availability and the mailbox server role, we're looking at a DAG. We're looking at database availability groups, perhaps even multiple DAGs, depending on your environment, the number of branch offices you have, and what your main focus is. So the concept is pretty simple, really. You create a database availability group, and that's simply an object that needs to be populated. So you populate it with member servers, right? Servers that can only be members of one DAG at a time. And then you take your active database copy, and you determine which servers get passive database copies on other DAG members. So here you can see from the graphic that System 1 has a DB1, that's the active database copy, and we've decided to create a passive copy on System 2. System 3 doesn't have a passive copy, it has a lagged copy. So we look at this, and ultimately the active database is copied or seeded over to the other servers, and then as more email comes in, what happens is the transaction logs are shipped over to those systems with passive copies and lagged copies, and on the passive copies, they're replayed into the passive copy database. Those databases are then just sitting there waiting to go into action should they need to. The lagged copies are a little different. With lagged copies, basically the transaction logs are kind of withheld from being played in for a period of time that you actually designate. It's brilliant, really. So this continuous replication is occurring in your organization. The transaction logs were reduced back with Exchange 2007 to 1 megabyte files, so they're easy to ship over and play in. So you look at this and you say, okay, so you ensure with lagged copies that if you have a problem, you can roll back to a time prior to the problem using the lagged copy. A lot of folks aren't really using lagged copies, but it's good to mention it anyway. And what this slide doesn't show you is things like where you place the witness server for all of this. Although in this case with 3 systems, it's not really necessary to have a witness server. For those of you who are up on clustering, the witness server is basically a way to avoid split brain syndrome and to ensure that you have quorum. The witness server functions as sort of a referee for all of this, so that in the case that one server does go down, the witness server can pretty much substantiate that that server is down and that, yes, the passive should take control. So we're not really looking in this slide at things like site resiliency and data center switchovers and so forth. That's really not the focus of this webinar. We really just wanted to ensure that the entire audience knew that high availability is established for the mailbox server role through database availability groups. So that's really the purpose of getting started here. But what about the next role, the unified messaging role? So as we mentioned at the outset, there are not too many that are using unified messaging, even though I personally think it's easy to set up. It provides incredible features like having your voicemail come right into your inbox, providing Outlook voice access so you can access your inbox through the phone, voicemail preview, which provides a transcription of your emails, which is sometimes awesome and sometimes it's quite funny actually to read. But oftentimes folks will ask, how do we ensure high availability and load balancing with a unified messaging server? Well, as is the case with all servers and services that you wish to ensure availability and load balancing on, you need to have more than one. So you set up your second server, you ensure that all of the WAV files that perhaps you're using for your auto attendance and so forth, they're copied over and configured, and now what? What do? Well, it's fully functional, but how do you make this secondary server play as part of the same environment and provide more availability? One of the things you do is you can place 2 or more servers in a single dial plan. So that's certainly helpful. You can also configure your voice over IP gateways to round robin the calls, which will load balance and provide redundancy if the call isn't accepted. And again, as mentioned, you want to make sure you copy your voice files for special auto attendant information over to the second or third or fourth server. Now, you might be wondering, what about using a load balancer? Well, you can use a load balancer, especially if you're using things like SIP. So it really depends upon your configuration. And so in that case, it would be very similar to load balancing Link server. Ports that can be looked at for this include the 5060 port or 5061. And so for those of you folks who are familiar with Link server and familiar with SIP, and you understand exactly what I'm talking about here, that you can look at load balancing in that sense. Now, keep in mind, is a service. It's a server role, but it's really a bunch of services. And so it's pretty easy to ensure availability of in that sense. But in talking to the folks at Chem Technologies, they've said that it is rare that anyone has asked to load balance a scenario. And I think that it's possibly because it's just, as a server role, it's not being used as much as it could be. I talked to the developers for Microsoft just yesterday, and I asked them about this, and they said, yes, it's just not being used as often as other roles, which is really a shame because I think it's a pretty awesome solution and one that I've personally helped many to overcome their fear of in terms of implementing smoothly. Now, with Exchange 2013, this is going to change. It may not change in terms of who's using it, but it's actually going to be put directly on the mailbox server role. It won't be a choice. Pretty much any server that you install as a mailbox server will have coming up with it. So maybe that'll encourage more use, and then correspondingly you'll have to worry about high availability and load balancing for it even more so. Let's talk now about the hub transport server role. So this role is actually the easiest role to make more highly available and load balance. You simply just deploy a second hub transport server. It's the only one of the server roles that's automatically designed for high availability. So load balancing occurs automatically between the hub transport servers and between the mailbox and servers with the hub transport servers within the same Active Directory site. That's automatically. The Edge Transport Server automatically load balances inbound SMTP traffic to hub transport servers for the Active Directory site that the Edge is subscribed to. So you might say, okay, so then I don't necessarily need to worry about additional load balancing. But that's not exactly true. And it's important. A lot of folks don't realize this. They think hub transport automatically high availability and load balancing if you just deploy a second one. That's only half of the story. This functionality doesn't cover the load balancing of messages received from non-Exchange sources, which could be external mail servers, third-party anti-spam or antivirus solutions, line of business applications, and so on. So if you have one or more of these types of applications, then you're going to need to think about load balancing in those cases. And so, the slides pretty much says you can use a hardware load balancer or Microsoft's NLB. The second part of that, the NLB part, we're going to talk about a little bit later. But typically, Microsoft does not recommend that you use Microsoft's NLB for balancing hub transport servers. So we're going to explain why. If you do plan on placing a load balancing solution in front of your hub transport servers, you're going to need to create a separate receive connector for that purpose and make sure that only traffic processed by that particular connector is subject to load balancing. So this can be achieved by adding an additional IP address to the hub transport server and associating this IP address with the new receive connector. In addition, the Exchange Server Authentication option, this should be disabled on the receive connector in order to ensure Exchange traffic doesn't route over it. So a couple of little nuances with Exchange if you're going to do this, but keep in mind the main point is that although hub transport servers are, they are the easiest to design for HA and to deploy that way, there are certain circumstances like if you have a line of business application where you're going to want to make sure you use a hardware load balancer or some type of software or virtual-based load balancer, not NLB, in order to load balance the solution. The Edge Transport Server is a little different. Yes, it is a transport server, but it's very different from the Hub Transport Server role. Those folks that have deployed them, you know what I'm talking about. So it sits in the perimeter of your network, And the Edge requires, if you're going to load balance an Edge transport server, you can't just pop another one in there. It requires you to deploy an additional Edge transport server and have identical configuration. So there's the hard part. Now, the easy part to this is that they've given you, right within Exchange, you have a couple of PowerShell scripts that you can use, and there's the export edgeconfig.ps1 script. What that'll do is, on the server that you have already set up and all configured, that will export all of your settings over to an XML file. You'll take that XML file, you'll bring it over to the other Edge transport server, and you'll use the import edgeconfig.ps1 script to import all of the settings from the XML file. Okay, so now you have two Edge transport servers, right? There's your redundancy, so you should have greater availability there. You have two of them, but they are not exactly set up equally. Why? Because they have all the same configuration settings, but this cloning process that we do, it doesn't duplicate the subscription settings. So that new Edge server will need to go through the subscription process and go through an Edge sync process in order to connect into the Active Directory on the internal network and connect you up to the internal hub transport servers. That's fair enough. So you're basically just using the script and then making sure you do the Edge sync process, do the subscription within your Active Directory. So as far as making sure these things are, handling things best in terms of load balancing, you don't typically deploy a load balancing solution to distribute the load across your Edge transport servers. So you can accomplish this by using DNS round robin, and you want to use multiple MX, that's mail exchange, multiple MX records that have the same preference value. So not too difficult to set up within your DNS. Just make sure that if you're using, let's say, a preference value of 10, that all of your Edge transport servers that you have, cloned, that they all have the same preference value in place. So, and that's another reason, just in talking with the folks from Chem Technologies, that it's not just the UM server role that doesn't typically get talked about. It's also the Edge transport server role that isn't typically discussed in terms of load balancing in order to provide greater high availability. Now, all of that changes. We've talked about all the main roles there: the mailbox server role, the UM, the hub transport, the Edge transport. Here's where it all comes down to the biggest factor for load balancing, and this is going to come into play even more so in the future. We'll talk about that hopefully in a moment. So it's the client access server role. Okay, so this is really the crux of the whole conversation here when it comes to load balancing, because yes, you do need to deploy additional CAS servers, but deploying additional CAS servers does not provide the high availability and load balancing that you need right out of the box. We wish it did, but it doesn't work that way. So in order to provide load balancing, what can you do? Well, you can use Microsoft's network load balancing, right? But I'm going to tell you right now, NLB is not supported in a number of different scenarios, but it's not supported, especially if the client access server is on the same server as a DAG mailbox server. So that's one aspect of this. The other thing is, I have a comment here on the slide from, it's not just a Microsoft TechNet author, it's the principal Microsoft TechNet author, who literally said, I would not recommend NLB for use with Exchange 2010. I would use a third-party load balancer, which can be hardware-based, software-based, or virtual. So that's where, really, if you're going to deploy CAS servers and you're concerned about high availability, well, then you're going to need to really look at third-party hardware-based load balancing. So a lot of folks, ask the question, why not just use DNS round robin like the Edge transport server role? But it's just not fault tolerant. So it may provide load balancing, but it won't provide that higher availability that you need from a hardware-based solution. So that that's a great idea, but kick that one out. It's not going to work. The other thing is, a lot of folks will ask the question, why am I worried about this? Isn't it just the DAG thing that I have to worry about? If I make sure my mailboxes are made more highly available, I'm good to go. No, that's a good way of looking at it. You're taking care of your first line of business, which is making sure your mailboxes are more highly available, and that's understandable. But in all honesty, if you don't make sure every other aspect of your organization has redundancy, then you're introducing that single point of failure problem that everybody faces at some point. So if you have a single CAS server, well, that's a single point of failure. Single hub transport server, single point of failure. We have this, we've already got this in our mind when it comes to our Active Directory. We know that we don't just deploy one domain controller, right? We know that we have to have at least a secondary domain controller. And that's sort of just been drilled into us for the past, 10 to 12 years since Active Directory was released. But it's the same when it comes to trying to provide high availability for our Exchange environment. Yes, it does come down to money in some senses, because if we don't have the money to provide multiple client access and hub transport and everything else, then we're really not going to be able to do that. So DAG would certainly be your first concern. But because of virtualization, the ability to virtualize your environment, and not that you want to virtualize two servers on the same box, you don't want to have two CAS servers on the same virtualized server, but if you can set up at least two Hyper-V or VMware servers, whatever you use for your virtualization, so that you can make sure you have that secondary client access server in play, hub transport server in play, that's really going to benefit you, because you don't want that single point of failure. As far as network load balancing, it's important to return back to that discussion, because really there's a ton of different reasons, limitations that Microsoft admits when it comes to deploying Windows NLB with Exchange 2010 hub transport servers and other servers. So for starters, NLB can't be used on Exchange servers where as we mentioned, where the hub transport and CAS servers and mailbox server roles, where they coexist on the same server and participate, where the mailbox server role is participating in a DAG. There's a lot of reasons for that, and that's basically because NLB, it can't work if you're using Windows failover clustering, and that's what DAG uses. So if that mailbox server is part of a failover cluster, you can't use NLB on the same box, so that's out of the picture. We don't recommend also putting more than 8 hub transport servers in an array that's load balanced by Windows NLB. So if you're a larger organization, NLB is going to fail you once you get over 8 hub transport servers. So you're going to need to load balance those transport servers using a hardware-based solution or some type of software or virtual-based solution, but not NLB. Also, Windows NLB doesn't detect service outages, so it can only detect server outages by IP address. So if the Exchange transport service fails, but the server is still functioning, NLB won't detect the failure and will still route incoming email messages to a hub transport server in that case. So at that point, you're looking at manual intervention. You'll have to remove the hub transport server that's experiencing the outage from the load balancing pool. So it's just a lot of different things. In addition, one more thing: NLB configuration can also result in port flooding, so that can overwhelm networks. And that's mainly because NLB has been designed that it simultaneously delivers all incoming client packets to all switch ports. So it does enable NLB to deliver high available, high throughput, but it does cause high switch occupancy. So those are all the negatives. Hopefully I've warned you off of NLB enough, but ultimately it's this client access server role that you really want to make sure you have in mind when it comes to load balancing and high availability. So in addition to making sure that you have the equipment in place to provide this, there's another aspect to it from the Exchange side, and that is the CAS array. So when it comes to the CAS array, there we go. That's the CAS array. There it is. When it comes to the CAS array, with the design of Exchange 2010, the CAS server role has more responsibility to care for external connectivity and internal MAPI connectivity. So it's a more essential role than ever before. It's not just external connectivity that you're worried about. Like, okay, my mobile users won't be able to access their mailboxes if the CAS goes down, but everyone else internally through MAPI connections will be able to access it. That's not the case. With Exchange 2010, MAPI internally goes through the CAS server too. So it's more essential than ever to ensure that the CAS role is highly available. So and that's the thing. If I'm scaring you a little bit, if you're starting to fear, you're saying, wow, I set up DAG, but I never really thought about all these other roles. Well, that's a good thing. That fear is a healthy fear because it means you'll start taking some action to make sure that these other roles don't go down. Kind of silly to have your mailbox servers made more highly available and lose your CAS server, and now nobody can access their mailboxes anyway. So they're still up, but they're not being accessed because that CAS role has to be made more highly available. A CAS array allows you to group CAS servers into arrays, so that if one CAS server were to go offline, the client will automatically be redirected to a functioning CAS and be able to maintain that connection. Now, it's good to note that the load balancer does that, not the CAS array. The CAS array itself is simply the load balanced object. So this is the part where you create the CAS array within the Exchange side, and it's simply a load balanced object that allows it to work now better with your hardware load balancer or software virtual load balancer. So it's just an extra component there. Okay, so I've been talking for a little bit. Why don't we stop for a minute and let's cut back over to Roger. Roger, we have any questions that have come in, and let's see if we can answer a few questions at this point.
We have had a number of questions that come in. I think we have time to take two, and then we'll hold the remaining questions for the final Q&A session. So the first one we have is, when would you recommend the use of Microsoft's NLB?
Yeah, never, never. When would I recommend it? Okay, so let's look at that from a different angle. Some have actually utilized NLB in a lab environment, and they say, I don't want to get a load balancer for doing lab work, and I want to practice load balancing and so forth. So, okay, fine, you might do that. You might use NLB in a lab environment because you're setting up your CAS servers and you want to test all of this out. But in all honesty, for anybody who's worked with hardware-based, appliance-oriented load balancers, you'll know that working with NLB won't help you in the production world, because the interface, on an appliance is very different from what you're going to be using when you're working with like a GUI with NLB. It's just going to be so different that the actual experience you gain working with it in a lab environment is not going to be of any benefit in the real world. So totally up to you. I mean, obviously, if you have a really, really small environment and you really don't want to go toward any type of other load balancer, and you want to ignore all of the limitations of NLB, then fair enough. It's an option. Microsoft does say it's an option, but I'll say again, the Exchange team has repeatedly said they don't recommend it, and every time I've mentioned it, I get an email from the Exchange team or from some of the people there that they just say, "Why do you keep saying that NLB is even possible? Can't you just get rid of that?" And I just say, "Look, it's in TechNet. It says you can use it, so I have to include it, as an honest reporter of the truth." But do I recommend it? No, never. Do you have another question for me, Roger?
We do. We have one more, and then we'll hold the remaining to the end. This one is, you're talking about 2010, but do you know what changes are coming in 2013?
Yes, actually we do. I may have mentioned this week was MEC, the Microsoft Exchange Conference. It's been gone for 10 years. They just brought it back. And so we were at the show. It was a great show. We were there. Actually, Kemp Technologies was there as well, and we had a great time together. And there were several sessions on load balancing and high availability and what they're doing with 2013. And it's really actually very exciting, because what they've done is they have made load balancing an even greater part of the Exchange 2013 world. In fact, they're focusing, all the slides focused on three different things. The architecture is changing tremendously for Exchange 2013. It's going back to a more simple two-role architecture. And so the one role is your client access role, and the secondary role is your mailbox role, and all the other transport features and everything else is kind of being pushed one way or another. But they would show these CAS arrays and these DAG groupings, and in front of all of those were the load balancers. So we do see a change in the architecture, and we'll have to cover that in a future webinar, perhaps once Exchange 2013 does go live. But make no mistake about it. For high availability, load balancing is a huge factor in all of this, and it's going to sit right in front of your CAS servers. So it was very exciting to be there at MEC and to hear this news, because it's making load balancing an even greater part of the solution, the overall solution. Okay, so what we'll do then is we'll just keep going here. We'll start talking a little bit, thinking about load balancing. It's time to start talking a little bit about Kemp itself and how Kemp Technologies can assist when it comes to all of these load balancing choices, because as an IT admin, you might be sitting out there, or a decision maker, and you're thinking, okay, great, now I have to think about load balancing, and this is something maybe you've never thought about before. Who do you choose? There's a variety of different vendors and so forth. So let's just discuss this a bit. Why Kemp? Why Kemp Technologies? So let me be clear. I don't work for Kemp, but for years now, when folks will ask me who to use for a load balancing solution, they were my first recommendation. Why? Well, it's hard to say what drew me to them. It started with asking around to other MVPs and Exchange experts who they were, who they were using, and hearing that name Kemp come back my way a lot. So I checked them out. I liked the branding, non-technical things that first pulled me in. But I was really thrilled at the price point and the set of features compared to other options on the market, especially for some of the smaller companies that I worked with, that put a couple of Exchange servers out there and they want to load balance them. And some companies are charging 4 or 5 times what the Exchange setup cost just to load balance, and so it was out of their reach. So, but even with larger companies who, when the economy was good, they didn't mind overspending on hardware, well, now they realize, hey, we can have a more cost-effective solution without giving up on features. And so again, that's where Kemp shines. So I guess what I'm saying overall is that I feel the reason to go with Kemp is that it's the right company with a great product and impressive support team. They have a sizing tool as well to make sure that you have the right Loadmaster for your organization, and they have a great price to feature ratio. So let's talk more about each of these things. So if we look at this here, in recent years, over half of Kemp's sales have been to organizations looking for Exchange-specific high availability and scale-out technology. And that's a big, that's in part due to Exchange 2010's focus on the need for load balancing for high availability. And again, we're going to see that even more so with Exchange 2013. So Kemp will just continue to grow. Kemp Loadmasters now ship with a pluggable template feature, and that makes an already easy-to-configure product even easier to use. If you've ever set up an appliance before, especially a load balancing appliance, you'll know that having a template is really just awesome because it makes it so much easier for you. Because of Kemp's strong Exchange focus, the first installable templates that they released were to handle all of the non-mailbox server roles that could be reasonably handled at a hardware load balancing level. And so that focus, it doesn't just, it extends beyond just templates to the training of its support team as well. They have an incredible focus. All Kemp Loadmasters include a free year of email, phone, and forum support, as well as regular firmware feature updates. So these guys, they know their stuff, and they know how to speak Exchange as well. It's not just a group of salespeople. But when you're talking to them, they know how to, they hold their own when it comes to the Exchange side, and that's really great. It's really nice to talk to folks like that who can really talk to you eye to eye. Kemp also has a service-aware DNS-based global load balancer. It's called the GEO Loadmaster. And this is pretty cool because it will automatically deliver dynamic responses to DNS queries for single or multiple FQDNs in the event of a service disruption or site disaster. And that's in order to minimize impact and also to lessen the need for manual intervention. The last thing you want is to have to manually intervene when it comes to your availability if you don't have to. So, of course, site resiliency in Exchange 2010 is still a long way from being fully automatable, and we know that. They're working on it for 2013. But, it's still, even with 2013, it's going to be a long way from being fully automatable. So adding a Geo Loadmaster will definitely help to define failover and failback policies, and it can reduce the operational uncertainty in the case of an outage. So that complements the troubleshooting and make-ready tasks, which must still be attained by your staff. There's still going to be a manual side to this, but anything you can do to help to eliminate the stress of it and really help to provide lessen the need for manual intervention is really going to be great. In addition, we talked about this Loadmaster sizing guide that's available. Kemp makes a range of Loadmasters for Exchange deployments. We'll take a look at their lineup in a moment, but every Loadmaster in Kemp's model line, from the smallest to the largest, it has an identical feature and functionality footprint. The difference is really the Loadmasters, they vary widely in capacity. So some are just under 1 gigabits per second throughput to over 8 gigabits per second, which is pretty impressive actually when you compare them to other load balancers on the market. SSL transaction capacity varies widely across their model line as well. So Kemp was really the first hardware load balancer vendor to introduce a straightforward online sizing guide that you see here, so that it takes the guesswork out of selecting the right size Loadmaster for your Exchange deployment. This way you get what you need. You don't get too little, you don't get too much, you get exactly what you need. And so it's really a great tool. You can see here it's pretty easy to work with. As far as the lineup itself, here's the product matrix. It shows all the different models. So once you go through the sizing tool and you know that you know what you're pretty much looking for, then you're going to need to look at the lineup, see what they offer in terms of the different Loadmasters that you see here, and then also there are virtual appliances that you might want to consider as well. And the other thing that I should mention is that typically when you're looking at load balancers, it's good to remember that you're looking at buying in pairs. Obviously, you don't want your load balancer to be your single point of failure either. And so that's been a big challenge with talking to folks about providing high availability. You talk to them and you say, okay, so what do you want to do? And they say, well, I want to make sure my mailboxes are that they have high availability on those. Great, but now you've also got to make sure that your whole network has redundancy. Everything from your routers, switches, everything. You have to have redundancy. You want to eliminate as many single points of failures as possible. So when you're talking about a load balancer, it's the same thing. You typically want to look at these in pairs. Now, as far as discussing Kemp's load balancers, they offer targeted functionality and high performance without all of the added expense that are associated typically with competitive products. And you can see here on the slide a variety of different competitive products that are out there. So out of 12 leading load balancer vendors, Kemp Technologies was one of only 2 vendors scoring in the highest value leader category in a Q4 2011 analyst report by EMA. So what's neat is that, in particular, EMA cited Kemp's proven ability to provide a solid set of features that meet the needs of its target solution demographic as a key differentiator. So you can see here, if you're looking at different vendors, these are the big, 12 right here. But it's nice to know that Kemp was really given that that award and was really noted for it being a value leader in this case. Just a few quick facts about Kemp, the company. You can see on the left who they are. Established in 2000, so they weren't born yesterday. These guys have been in this rodeo for quite a long time. I don't know why I just used the rodeo analogy. I think I've been hearing that over the past week from the Exchange folks. This isn't our first rodeo. They kept saying that all the time. They didn't say that from the stage though, so that was nice because I think we would have all laughed. And I'm sort of sorry I said it here. So, but they have been around for a long time. Established in 2000. They have tons of customers, 10,700 customers worldwide. So they've got a worldwide sales and support presence, and they're really growing at an impressive clip. It's just tremendous to see the growth. And when we look at the right-hand side as far as what they do, we know that LoadMasters, they're perfect for Exchange. And you can see all of the features. They offer Layer 4 and Layer 7 load balancing, although just as a note with Exchange 2013, Layer 7 is not going to be necessary because that Layer 7 affinity is not going to be a big concern. So they have SSL offloading and SSL acceleration, comprehensive health checking, IPS security, just a whole list of features, just awesome. Active, hot standby, high availability, so it's all there. LoadMasters are perfect not only for Exchange, however. They have a feature set that extends beyond Exchange to a wide variety of enterprise line of business applications. And so, especially if you're looking at things like, Link and other solutions, SharePoint and so forth, the whole lineup, not just Microsoft products, but the whole lineup. Kemp can handle pretty much anything. So you're probably thinking at this point, okay, great, I love it. How do I get one? Well, that's the next slide here. So Kemp wants to make it easy for you to try out a LoadMaster. They want you to try it out in your own unique environment. So here you see a couple of URLs. You can go straight to the URLs that you see here and get a no obligation evaluation unit. Right? Or you can just go to Kemp's homepage. It's at kemptechnologies.com, where it will be very easy to navigate to one of their many generous trial offers. So you ask for a free unit, they will send it to you. It'll come in a big box. You'll love it. It's always exciting when you get like a big box like that, and you open it up and it's got a load balancer inside. It's like, whoa, that's just it. I know when I've tried them out in the past, those days are really great. You open the box like, yes, I got a new toy. So that's really great. However, there's also the virtual side. So if you want to download the free trial of their virtual appliance, you see another link there. Or again, you can go through the kemptechnologies.com website. So you can, you can also, at any point look through the entire site, read more about what they do and what they provide. So now at this point, you probably have some questions. Maybe you have some high availability questions. Maybe you have some questions for the Kemp experts that we have on the line. So they're on the line. Let's take a look at some of the questions that we have and see if we can use the remaining time that we have here to answer a few of these questions.
We do have quite a few questions, so we'll start off with a couple for our Kemp team, starting with this one from Corbin. Where do you see Kemp fitting in with Exchange 2013 in the future?
Well, as Peter mentioned, high availability is still important, if not more important, in Exchange 2013, and the client access server role has a lot of importance. One thing that we want to make sure we iterate is that we at Kemp Technologies are very Exchange-focused, and being that we're certified as a Microsoft partner, we're going to continue to work with Microsoft to make sure that we fit in quite comfortably quite comfortably with their offerings.
We got another question. This one's kind of general, but maybe David, you can give some advice in terms of where they can go. The question is, where can they get information about Kemp-specific configurations of the LB?
That information actually is available all over our website. We've got a support portal that's actually open to the public with all of our documentation, along with deployment guides and case uses and stuff like that. Also, our support team is very knowledgeable about things when it comes to Microsoft Exchange. We've been doing it for a long time, so you can imagine a lot of their focus is Microsoft Exchange. They're very easy to get a hold of. You can just send an email to nasupport@kemptechnologies.com, and they'd be happy to help with any questions you might have.
Great, thanks. Here's another one for either Jason or David. Can a single Kemp LB pair function on multiple LAN segments?
That is correct. There are some considerations that are detailed in our configuration documentation, as David mentioned, but that is supported as well.
Another question, can we get access to online training?
Take that one. Yes, we do actually have some training material that we can give to people. Most of that comes in PDF formats. There is a training program that actually is currently run for our partners right now that's going to get ported over to for some end user use. So when that comes out, it'll be available for everybody who's actually deploying these boxes or virtuals. The best thing to do is take a look at our website periodically to check that out within our support center, and we'll have information on our website about when that will be available.
Here's another one for either Jason or David. Does Kemp still have templates for Exchange plus ones for Link? I was impressed with how easy it was to configure for Exchange 2010 in the past.
Currently, we don't have for 2013, but this is definitely on our roadmap to be released, and the same goes for Link as well.
Okay, we've got a number of other questions. Let's see. J. Peter, do you have time to take a few that are more general HA related?
Sure, I'll give it a shot.
When is Exchange 2013 likely to be released?
That's a good question. I don't know if I can answer that question completely honestly. I'm under an NDA because I'm in the TAP program. I'll say this much: they were sort of hinting at first quarter. Let's not say first quarter. Let's say early. Let's say early of 2013. So it wasn't looking like it was going to go live this year. It was looking like early next year.
And another, what is the log replication interval in a DAG?
The default log replication interval, I guess, let me see, was it, I'm not really sure. Typically, you set the log for lagged copies. If you're talking about lagged copies, that interval, you can set it up to whatever you want. So you might have one lagged copy that's a day old or 2 days old. It just depends on what you feel is the need for your organization. Maybe I'm not really hearing the question right.
Okay, we can. We've got a number of others here. Another one for the Kemp team. Actually, this is more of a comment from Jay. I used Kemp for SharePoint, terminal services, and Exchange. Really, it's the best load balancer. Same can be configured in less than 10 minutes. Keep it up, guys. So.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
And I'm going to, let's see, we're coming up on our time here, so we've got lots of questions. So I'm going to have a general. We've got a number that are specific to questions relating to setting up load balancer that I'll maybe ask the Jason or David to respond on where the individual should go to get more specific information or help with specific setup questions.
Yeah, like David mentioned. Go ahead, David.
Sorry. Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, our support just so you have a little bit of background on it, each one of our devices, whether they're hardware or software, comes with a in-box support contract. As soon as you have product in hand, our support team is available to you. Even if you're doing an evaluation of our hardware or software and you actually haven't bought anything, our support is available to you, and you can contact them. Best way of contacting is through email, sending them an email at nasupport@kemptechnologies.com, because what that does is it opens a support ticket for you automatically, and our support team is usually pretty good about getting back to those within the same day. We also have a phone number that you can contact directly for our support team, but usually the email is probably the fastest way to do it.
Great, thanks. And we have, again, we've got lots of questions. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them. Let's see, we'll take one more for J. Peter for you. Let's see. And then maybe one more for the Kemp team. J. Peter, here's one for you. What if I don't have an Edge transport server? How about high availability for emails coming in from the internet?
Well, no, that's fine. I mean, typically if you don't have an Edge transport server and email is not coming to that server first, I mean, you might have a solution online that you're using, some kind of solution to provide added protection. That's what the Edge transport server is for, right? But if you don't have one, that's okay. It's still going to come into a hub transport server. So, you know, that hub transport server is going to, you know, be exposed to the internet directly for email coming in. And so in that case, you can certainly utilize, with your DNS records, you can certainly utilize the same, you know, preference settings to make sure you have multiple hub transport servers, you know, that mail can come into. You know, so it's just a little different in terms of your configuration. Microsoft does recommend that you do have on your perimeter an Edge transport server for your own sake, but in the event that you don't, you can still have email coming straight into the hub transport.
And we'll take one more question for the Kemp team, and then I'll just, you know, again, apologize that we can't get to all the questions. I really appreciate everybody with all the good questions you sent in, and you can expect some follow-up from the Kemp team individually when it's appropriate on some of your questions. And this one, so we'll have time for one more here. Again, for either David or Jason, the question is, does the Loadmaster perform stateful packet inspection?
Sorry, I had you on mute there. We actually don't do stateful packet inspection. We do TCP state information at the lowest level, as well as applications persistence awareness. So things like HTTP, we can inspect headers, cookies, and things like that. But as far as the packets themselves, we aren't tracking which packets came from which place aside from IP import information.
Okay, and we've got, so I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. We got a couple of general questions about availability of today's presentation. It is being recorded, so it will be available in the future. So we want to thank everybody for joining today. On behalf of msexchange.org, I want to thank J. Peter and all of you for joining us today. And we, of course, want to thank Kemp Technologies for making it possible for us to present today's event. Please watch your email for new msexchange.org webinars that will be coming soon. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for attending.